Hi, guys.
Hi.
Welcome. We've got a great panel. So we're going to get started. I've encouraged people to send us questions as we go. And we'll start. Just give us a quick introduction and we'll go on from there. So then I'll ask some questions and we'll get going. Anyone want to start? Katie?
Sure, I'm happy to start. My name is Katie Boren. I'm the president and CEO of the Oklahoma City Innovation District, located in Oklahoma City, right adjacent to downtown. And we are a 501c3, so we are not part of a chamber or a particular university. So that kind of gives us a little bit of an advantage as convener,
Right.
an ecosystem builder. So we really have a great partnership across the city with, entrepreneurs and investors, universities, private industry. It's really a great groundswell here. So we're happy to be on and talk about the Oklahoma City Innovation District and learn about other innovation districts today.
Great. Thanks for joining us. Emily?
Sure. My name is Emily Kruger. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for 16 Tech Community Corporation and also our incoming president and CEO. 16 Tech Community Corporation is also a nonprofit, and we're responsible for the physical and programmatic development of Indy's Innovation District. The first time that I was actually in the area that is now 16 Tech, I was on a long distance run as I was training for the Chicago Marathon, and I was lost. And the reason is because there was absolutely no compelling reason to go to 16 Tech otherwise. It wasn't like other innovation districts. There was no single landowner. There was a collection of some old, underutilized warehouse buildings. And that's because we're located at the confluence of the White River and Fall Creek in downtown Indianapolis, a city that people don't typically picture as one that has water associated with it, especially knowing that I'm on the call with a colleague from the Pittsburgh area. But the land that we've been in the process of developing is historically the site of the city's water infrastructure. And that was why it wasn't conducive to development, and also why, frankly, people weren't really welcome in the area either. And if you zoom out slightly, we're located within a historically Black neighborhood of Indianapolis, and one that has an incredible history, also a history that's very closely connected with innovation and entrepreneurship, as we're just about a mile away from the Madam C.J. Walker Theater, Madam C.J. Walker being the first female self-made millionaire and entrepreneur in our country, and a Black woman. And so today that brings me to where we are. In the last 12 months, we've opened 3 buildings in the midst of the pandemic. We have over 500 people and 60 companies that are currently working in 16 Tech. We have companies like Eli Lilly, which have put an innovation flag here in 16 Tech and have moved their digital health team to the district. And we also have a company that I'm sure all of you might have heard of, Amazon Web Services, which has taken note in terms of what we're doing. And there's one state in the country that has a partnership around Industry 4.0 with Amazon, and it's Indiana. And that partnership is located in 16 Tech as well. So that's a little bit of background. We got a lot going on, and just really looking forward to the conversation today.
Great. Thanks. And thanks for joining us. Sean.
Hi, everyone. Sean Luther. I'm the Executive Director of Innovate PGH in Pittsburgh. Innovate organized the Pittsburgh Innovation District in 2018. So at an organizational level, similar to Katie and Emily, we are an independent 501c3, though we are convened and chaired by our 2 major research institutions here in Pittsburgh, the University of Pittsburgh and Carnegie Mellon. We operate the Innovation District as one of 3 major business lines. So we have a citywide focus here in Pittsburgh on workforce development and tech training, as well as entrepreneurship ecosystem development. But the first program we came out the gate with was our place-based program in the Innovation District. Again, a little bit different than the physical form in Oklahoma City and in Indy. The Pittsburgh Innovation District is essentially an overlay within an existing strong neighborhood where our university and medical assets are.
Right.
So the Oakland neighborhood is home to about $2 billion worth of annual R&D spend. And so in many ways, we are a naturally occurring innovation district. And so the goal of Innovate PGH is to actually build an economic development platform, a marketing and a business development effort over top of that existing really strong neighborhood framework. In addition to Pitt and Carnegie Mellon, we have two other smaller universities, Chatham and Carlos. Have just under 70,000 college students at peak season. And Oakland is also home to our major hospital system, UPMC, which has three clinical hospitals and two major research centers located within the Innovation District. So really excited to be here with Emily and Katie and talk to Flyover Country.
Great. Well, thank you all for being here. Thanks, Sean. We're going to get to this study that was published in 2014 by the Brookings Institute about innovation districts, and Walker and Kruger, the women who wrote it, described, and I think you guys have echoed this in your descriptions, but here's their description of innovation districts. Innovation districts constitute the ultimate mashup of entrepreneurs, educational institutions, startups and schools, mixed-use development, medical innovations, bike sharing, and bankable investments, all connected by transit, powered by clean energy, wired for digital technology, and fueled by caffeine. And I thought I wanted to see if all of you agreed with that definition of the mashup, because it is a real mashup: public, private, land, money, all of that, and it's kind of exciting to see it. And I wanted to, all of you have this connected tissue with the Brookings and their model. And Sean, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about just the model in general, because I think the audience would be interested in hearing about it, and some people may want to look at it, replicate it. I think we've got a link to their paper somewhere in our show notes, I guess. So.
Yeah, so it's really interesting, Tom, that all three districts here have some kind of antecedent relationship with Bruce Katz and Julie Wagner and the rise of the innovation districts. I think some of the common thread is all three of our cities and many mid-sized cities off the coast in the States right now have been examining how do we create a competitive angle to keep us in the conversation with the big coastal hubs, and even the international tech hubs that have emerged. And as our cities looked at these citywide, region-wide scans, the result of the Oklahoma City Innovation District and 16 Tech and a number of districts like that is that we needed these place-based nexuses of our innovation districts because our assets are generally and often spread across the city. And so I think what's unique is all three of these districts essentially are the capital of innovation within their neighborhoods, within their cities. Though in Pittsburgh, at least, that doesn't mean that this is the only place where you have strong innovation. Right. And that's been complicated for us. Are we part of the innovation economy? Are we a competitive element of the innovation economy? Can we be both? And I think in Pittsburgh, we still don't totally know the answer to that. But we do know that amalgamation of chaos that you talked about, Tom, of caffeine and transit and academic resources and startup energy, that is what mid-sized cities need to be competitive. And because it's the same package you get on the coasts.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to look at it and describe it. Emily, Katie, you have any comments about the Brookings model and how you have utilized it or have it help you, guide you?
Well, I think Oklahoma City, from my observations, is kind of a hybrid of Emily and Sean's circumstances. We also did get our start by the spark that was the Brookings study, but our physical location was kind of intuitive because unlike Emily, it did have a lot of assets. It was an established medical center traditionally. and a cluster kind of already in formation. So the where was a little bit intuitive. The role we play, much as Sean referenced and the mashup reference, is that all of these incredible things were happening with, 2 R1 research universities and, just in this physical space, and 120 plus postdocs, and I think close to 80% of all the state's NIH funding. So there's a lot going on in this cluster and in aerospace, in defense, and unmanned systems, but everybody was doing it in silos. There was no mashup. And so that was really not only the development of the physical area and the epicenter, so people knew where to come. They knew where to come for programming. They knew where to come to collaborate and interact. They knew where they wanted to be located. But we also were that connective tissue. We created the ecosystem and brought and convened all of those people in the mashup. So that really was the missed opportunity that was identified by Brookings, and we moved into that space.
I mean, having that density, I think, is really beneficial to everyone. And you've touched on something that I want us all to come back to, which is you mentioned aerospace, for instance. And I think that one of the things that I think came up in the Brookings paper, it may have been another one, but was identifying the core research areas of your universities and looking at how you can create unique ecosystems that where you have a strategic advantage that are pretty specific, right? I mean, something like aerospace, because I think in flyover country, most of our cities don't support super broad ecosystems. There's just not the talent and the capital, but our universities are pumping out this great research, and we have core corporations that are interested in innovation. I mean, you guys, if you can touch on that a little bit, how, Emily, you guys looked at some of those silos in terms of specific areas to build an ecosystem around.
Yeah, it is really interesting. We've got kind of a spectrum here from Pittsburgh to Oklahoma City to Indianapolis. And so We've been charged with developing the ecosystem, like Katie just articulated, while at the same time we're building the physical place. And I love that quote from Brookings. And I think one of the challenges that we have experienced in the last couple of years is kind of, where do you start when you're trying to create that mashup, right? What's the clear starting point? And there's not a right way to do it. For us, there was certainly an emphasis on the physical development. We wanted to have some existing buildings and assets in place that could be a convening function for people. But that's why we have a lot of real entrepreneurial spirit in the DNA of 16 Tech, because in the last couple of years, we've had to throw a lot of things at the wall, regardless of the pandemic, to kind of see what would stick. From an industry perspective, though, it's really clear Indiana has historical strengths in the life sciences and advanced manufacturing, and a growing technology sector as well. One of the things that's key to those industries is that technology is actually a strategy for our life sciences and advanced manufacturing companies. And so the partnership that I mentioned around Industry 4.0, technology is a really great example of the applied research opportunities that we're going to see more of at 16 Tech. The other example I'll just highlight and relates not only to the industry focus, but this mashup that innovation districts are trying to create, is a programmatic partnership that we have named Analytics IN, and that's bringing together some of our top corporations in Indiana. So we have Lilly, Cummins, Anthem, One America, IU Health, as well as our Tier 1 research universities, Purdue, Notre Dame, IU, all working together at 16 Tech around data analytics and AI. And so these are just a couple small examples of the types of projects that we see coming out of 16 Tech and the way that we've tried to align the historical strengths of Indiana with where we see things are going in the future.
Hey, Tom, before we continue on the thread of kind of what the industry sectors look like, I think Emily said something that was really important and resonated with me. Even though our districts were founded based on this kind of Brookings thesis, there was no actual implementation guide in any of the reports of how you get from zero to an innovation district. And so I really appreciate Emily saying that kind of what sticks to the wall has really been our work plan for the last couple of years. What I think you're seeing in all three cities now, though, is a maturation of our district strategy. And so I think if we did this call again in 2 years, you're going to see very different outputs in all three cities. And you're going to see these innovation districts really start to hit their stride and be that assemblage of a variety of different assets that our innovation ecosystems may have been missing 5 years ago when these reports came out.
Tom, if I could add one other thing too, I mean, the origin story of 16 Tech has a couple components to it. It was actually an original study with Battelle. We certainly have a partnership with Brookings. That was kind of our case statement for an innovation district in Indianapolis. But what is also really important is that neighborhood leaders in the neighborhoods around 16 Tech recognized a need for job opportunities and workforce opportunities. And it was the conversations with neighborhood partners, our corporate leaders, and our civic stakeholders that it was collectively that impetus which resulted in not only the formation of 16 Tech Community Corporation, but the initial seed funding then from the city of Indianapolis, which enabled us to start developing the public infrastructure for the district. So just as there's been wonderful research and thought leadership coming from Battelle, from Brookings and others, we take a lot of pride in the fact that our origin story also includes this partnership with the neighborhoods that are adjacent to 16 Tech.
That is also, there's a lot of overlap. You know, one of the things that I think is a theme is that no innovation district is exactly like another.
Sure.
But there is overlap, and one of the ways I think Emily and I overlap is also our geographic location in the city is immediately adjacent to a historic African-American community in Oklahoma City. And so baked into our mission and our work is exactly kind of in line with what Emily's talking about, is creating pathways for workforce opportunities associated with the prosperity that the innovation district is bringing. So we're deeply embedded in Northeast Oklahoma City to make sure that those pathways start early, and they start through STEM education and then also workforce development and upskilling and reskilling that are pointed towards our partners in the district. And so we have a similar story, I think, that and that we're equally proud of the work we're doing. And we're also putting some projects together for some EDA grants that also involve the neighborhood. So I think that's something that we share.
I mean, the good news is all of you will be able to empathize with the entrepreneurs who come to your cities and want to start businesses, because having done this, you know, a few times in my life, you're right. You have a plan and then it goes out the window and it's a blank slate and it's a juggling act. And you guys with the having to deal with state and local government and private interest universities. I mean, it's quite a juggling act, and the neighborhoods and doing everything in a way that works for all those constituents is complicated, to say the least, right? Especially without a roadmap. So I definitely appreciate it just as an entrepreneur, because it's exhilarating, but it's also can just drive you nuts, right?
Well, it's also an interesting example of like all three districts having multiple strengths rather than just one.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
And I think that's unusual in cities the size of ours. Usually you have a hospital system or a research university or a private university that's really driving this conversation, and they then take ownership of that. You see that in Winston-Salem with Wake Forest and their partnership with Wexford. They've got a soup to nuts, one property owner, one developer, one opportunity mentality. And some days I'm extremely jealous of that.
Right.
But I think the reason that Emily and Katie have been so successful is because that the innovation districts in these cities are being put out into leadership positions rather than the universities kind of pushing everyone out of the way, either intentionally or unintentionally.
Good point. You touched a little bit, Katie, on this, and I want to come back to it, which is talent. And, you know, we have three challenges. One is attraction, one is retention, and then the third is developing the workforce that we have in our cities for this next wave that's actually upon us, right? As we move into, you know, hardware capabilities are going to allow some incredibly sophisticated AI and things like that. So if any of you can touch on any of the initiatives you've got around talent development and what we can do with the workforce in our city that needs, you know, additional skills to be employable and have real careers.
Well, one of the reasons the Innovation District was established was to create this ecosystem that is more attractive to talent, for retaining talent, for recruiting talent, because it is really an ecosystem that allows collaboration across sectors, you know, and your technology does not stay in biomedical, for example. It may be happening in aerospace too. And so pulling all of that together in a physical place, a programmed place, an activated place is a competitive advantage to other cities who don't have that ecosystem. And so if you're a student graduating here, if you're looking to transfer here from Seattle or wherever, if the absence of this place and the absence of this ecosystem, it matters. And so just the effort itself, and it's going well, and we're seeing that exact result. And then also what we talked about was the intentional programming and work locally to increase opportunities for development of workforce here.
I really agree with that, Katie, that it's so important to, again, have the Innovation District not just be a place, but also be the de facto area where you go if you're looking to be connected outside of the ecosystem. I think that's so important. I also think, Tom, to your core question, I almost think we have to stop asking these questions in concert around talent attraction and retention and true workforce development. There are different gaps in all of our cities. They require extremely different solutions, and there's different demands and opportunities on the actual hiring side. So Katie talked a little bit about the actual retention and attraction of technical talent. We continue to be hammered, not just by companies in the Pittsburgh Innovation District, but around Pittsburgh, that Pittsburgh needs to be competitive in attracting and retaining talent for them. That it's easy to get a job and not move to Pittsburgh anymore. And that is damaging a little bit the prospects of what the tech economy can do for a resurgent Pittsburgh. But to the opposite side of that coin, I think there's a lot more opportunity for innovation districts to really get in the weeds on tech training and traditional workforce development. One of the programs we are relaunching in 2 months is actually a pretty wholesale ripoff of a hugely successful program in University City in Philadelphia. In Philly, it's called the West Philly Skills Initiative. In Pittsburgh, it's called the University Talent Alliance. And the base thesis here is to use our district anchors, Pitt, Carnegie Mellon, and UPMC in our case, to create an intentional hiring pipeline to the communities around our innovation district. So if anyone is looking at kind of plug and play programs, I'd really encourage you to reach out to the West Philly Skills folks. They're extremely receptive to sharing the model. They know what works. They've have a bunch of years of experience and kind of getting to the best practice point of view right now. And that's the type of intentionality that Katie and Emily were mentioning, that really only can exist at a district level. It's the expansion of the place-based strategy into workforce. And it's what makes me really excited about cities our size compared to just the giant abyss of government and workforce boards that exist in some larger cities.
Tom, a couple things. It's similar to what Katie mentioned. I think one of the opportunities in Indianapolis is that by concentrating resources in a physical place like 16 Tech, when talent is moving and considering an opportunity potentially from the coast to come to Indianapolis, it shows them it's not just the first opportunity that's going to exist, that there's a second or third opportunity.
Yeah.
In some respects, that was kind of like a pre-COVID mindset as well, where we were much more place-based than we are today, especially from the tech industry where so many jobs have gone remote. But I do think it's important to show in markets like ours that if you move here for a new job, that there's going to be additional opportunities for you. And it's those later opportunities which oftentimes impact, or the perception of those opportunities that oftentimes impact someone's decision to relocate. I also, because I mentioned COVID, I'll just acknowledge in many respects, we've cited how innovation districts are this place of mashup and mix-up. And for anyone who's familiar with Brookings studies, you'll encounter a phrase, creative collisions or serendipity, this idea that you're just going to bump into someone and come up with your next idea for a company or a product. And what COVID has really forced us to do is be just as intentional in developing the social infrastructure as we are with the physical infrastructure at 16 Tech. And I think that that's really important because, like Katie and Sean, we have talent initiatives that are we're in the process of launching and have some pilots underway, specifically targeted towards neighbors who are in the community adjacent to 16 Tech. But we're also creating spaces where people can build social capital and they can network. And we all know that's really important to getting a job. Yes. And I think that's a big part of the value proposition that physical place-based communities can still provide. And the last thing that I'll mention, and Sean alluded to this in terms of some of the Skills Institute that he referenced. Rewind the clock, about 2 years ago, we launched a talent pilot program and pathway program in the life sciences. And we have some significant opportunities at play right now to do a similar thing in advanced manufacturing and early, more nascent conversations around the tech industry. But what strikes me, whether in each of those conversations, there are some fundamental skills that transcend industry right now in terms of especially digital readiness and preparedness and fluency that really, again, transcends industry. And I think that's where innovation districts can also play a special role in connecting what are some of these needs for the future workforce that might be agnostic of industry, just because the role that technology will continue to play. Yes. So those are just some additional thoughts in your question.
Yeah, I like to think of it, the talent stack, right? Like the tech stack. And yet there are some things that are sort of fundamental. And one of them we run across a lot in IT, and we've got a very active and engaged kind of CIO, C-level IT audience. And it's soft skills are important as well, right? When you're moving into the tech space and understanding, and this is across the board, but just basic, listening skills and then, you move on to presentation skills and other things like that. But, I think this is an opportunity for people moving into technology. All the senior people in tech now, 90% of them came out of programming, and that's DIY, especially back in the day. And And now they're talking a lot about how do I gain more soft skills to communicate better with the rest of the organization. And but you're right. So there are some things that are very specific to talent stack, and some things that work generally that have a ton of leverage, right? And I think, yeah, the programs, anytime that you guys can think about specific programs, I think that they're, our audience today and in the future loves hearing about that stuff. Those templates, like the West Philly thing, right? I mean, that's awesome that someone has built a template that they know works, and it's just a matter of implementing it and adding your flavor to it. I think that's super powerful. Are there other things like that any of you have implemented where you found a program that someone else has developed that you can leverage and share with the audience?
Well, oh, go ahead, Katie.
Oh, I'm sorry. One of the things that has also been kind of a theme of discussion is that, your role as an innovation district might evolve over time. So Emily mentioned trying things and, failing fast and moving on and figuring out, where you should be spending and investing your time. And that may look different in year 1 and 2 than it does in years 3 and 4. So we
undoubtedly will.
Yeah, exactly. And so, so we established our organization in 2019, and we did so. We did not have buildings. Everything here, was not owned or managed by the Innovation District. So we did have some investment by the city that is unique to Oklahoma City. It's called a Metropolitan Area Projects. And so it's called MAPS, and it is a significant investment. This is the 4th iteration of it. And it is almost $1 billion this time. And part of it was an investment of $71 million into the Innovation District. So we will soon have a building. We break ground in a month.
Cool.
But that has also created more private investment and development in the area by design. So our role has been, without a building, our role has been creating programming. So that's been a real tool of ours without having a home, that we have been having to create this ecosystem and this following and this these partnerships and collaborations in the form of relationship building and heavy programming. And so that has been our role. We are now moving into many more roles. One of them does have a workforce element to it, participating in a solution that is more tailored to the cluster that we have and where the puck is, but also where the puck is going. And that is a biopharmaceutical manufacturing workforce training center in the Innovation District. So adding those elements, this one is pointed towards workforce and it is pointed towards a particular sector, but it is exactly what is called for. And so we're leading on that. And so that's kind of an evolution of our district in our short life. But it points to specific programmatic and workforce elements that are particular to our innovation district in our city at this time.
Emily and Katie, we have not been very aggressive in the programmatic component of things. I don't like throwing events. I don't want to throw a party at my house. I'm worried no one's going to show up.
Come on, Sean.
I'm curious how you all, as you either have been in this space, Katie, or are moving into that space, Emily, how you developing independent programming has gone over with the existing ecosystem players in your cities, and how any of that is interacting with or leveraging what's happening on campus and that more student entrepreneurship focus.
Well, it's interesting because we opened our first building during COVID when no one was gathering. And so we've been rolling out events and programs slowly, and doing so at times in partnership with existing groups in our city that have already an affiliation with a certain industry or community. Powder Keg being one that's located and that does some great events for us with the tech community locally. So We haven't run into any competition. And that might be a reflection of just the circumstances and the timing of the last 2 years.
Right,
but I think it's also enabled us to be thoughtful about, well, what are the gaps that we can fill that people are looking to us to do? Because there's lots of events out there. It's also important that from our perspective, programming means more than just events. To me, it gets back to this: how are we engineering the social infrastructure? So we have in our 3 buildings in 16 Tech, one building has a maker space in it. If you're an individual and you're wanting to prototype a product, or a small business, you want to prototype a product, that's where you go. In another building, we have what is our statewide convening group for advanced manufacturers across the country. And then in our 3rd building, we have really a maker space that's for manufacturers. So if you're a manufacturer and you're wanting to innovate your manufacturing processes, that's where you go. Programming, to me, is how do you connect people in each of those 3 buildings who might also be working on something that's related or similar in a way that can be scaled across the district, and that doesn't necessarily require a human to broker it and build those relationships. So for us, a lot of our engagement that we're in the process of vetting and anticipate rolling out is really meant to help facilitate some of those connections that might not need an event in order to realize a relationship or make a connection that can have a meaningful outcome.
Those connections are super important for sure. Katie, anything to?
Yes, absolutely. I think we approached it in a similar way, that we assessed the landscape and made sure we did not repeat any programming that existed, and instead would come alongside and partner to create an even bigger event. We also decided to really brand our programming. It doesn't look like anyone else's programming. It doesn't look like the Chamber's programming, or it's not so focused on one technology or one sector, or just entrepreneurship, or just venture capital, or anything that's super hyper focused. And so we had to kind of identify our brand and really we created a following, so people knew through our curated newsletter, through our branding and marketing, and through our actual events, what to expect and where to go for this unique, uniquely curated set of events and programs. And so we do have kind of the networking programming day and evening on a regular basis, but we also, we will find a technology and then program around it in a way that brings multiple sectors together, that cross-cutting technology. So that's how we end up bringing, similar to Emily, but instead of a makerspace kind of hands-on atmosphere, it is programmed by us by subject. And so, for example, we had we put on an innovations in radar technology half-day conference recently, and we had 3 panels. One was biomedical, one was weather, and one was aerospace. And just the panelists alone stayed till 7:30 in the evening, because they were so thrilled to get together and be able to talk about these issues that they normally talk about in their own office and in their own hallway. And then the audience felt the same. So we kind of went in there and tried to figure out where we could best be additive and really then take the lead kind of on the ecosystem programming.
That makes a ton of sense. We've got 15 minutes or so left. I want to make sure that if there are any questions, people have an opportunity to ask. If you want to put them in the comments, we would love to hear what you all are curious about. Otherwise, we'll just keep going. All right. No curiosity out there right now, which is fine. So talk about for a minute the public and private space mashup that you guys have. where, I mean, I think you understand the concept, but it seems very important in this whole idea of building a physical place, that there's spaces that are easily accessible by the public. There are spaces that are maybe privately owned. And how do you negotiate all that? Are there any issues around that?
I think maybe the most challenging thing on that, and this is super in the weeds, is most of our district is spoken for by fairly traditional academic uses. So anytime we are looking to convene, anytime we're shopping space for entrepreneurs or new corporate partners, we're generally looking on campus. And frankly, I think a lot of more mature founders don't want to be on campus anymore. And so that part of the innovation district in Pittsburgh is kind of creating that private sector corollary in a very similar space of, just because you've graduated, just because you founded a company, doesn't mean that this district is no longer for you. And that is difficult, not just in a space providing perspective, but all of our amenities are oriented around 70,000 college students. So I've got Bud Light buckets for days. I've got every single fast casual concept you could ever imagine, but there's very little in terms of where would you put a deal together? Where do you go out for a celebration dinner? Where do you take your team as part of a staff building exercise for these younger companies? And so that really gets to a really traditional kind of downtown development mentality that I think a lot of our districts are benefiting from, kind of 30 years of urban resurgence in our downtown district partners.
Yeah.
Tom, on our end, on the other end of the spectrum, as we're creating a physical space, I'll start first just by mentioning our master plan, which guides the overall physical development of the 50 acres that we're responsible for. And there are some very key aspects of that plan, primarily ground floor retail and open spaces, so there's ways to both show innovation and invite people into buildings. So it's very intentional in our master plan that not everything that's happening in 16 Tech is happening behind closed doors. So that's embedded in our design philosophy for the district. Part of that is also some of the physical connectivity that we are responsible for creating really connects to some trail networks within our system. So it's providing multimodal accessibility and some additional physical connectivity, which I think will help draw people to the district, because right now it's not an area that people are used to coming to. So we're pulling people. And that brings me to the last project of ours that I'll briefly mention is the building that I'm in today. It's the former Indianapolis Water Company headquarters. We call it HQO. It's a $25 million renovation, which we completed last year. And in addition to the maker space that I mentioned earlier, it has flexible office space, but perhaps more importantly, it has a 50,000 square foot food hall, where 50% of our tenants are new business concepts, 65% are female or minority owned or operated. We have a stage that gets used for everything from local school concerts to some pitch competitions and everything in between. So we've also really invested in creating a space that is a very clear way to learn about 16 Tech and a gathering space, both for people who are working in the district, but also the broader Indianapolis community.
Sean, you can go check out Restaurant Concepts and bring the Deal restaurant to Pittsburgh.
I think we need a restaurant exchange program for our innovation district. So I'm happy to go try all of them in Indianapolis.
We'd love that.
Deal, right? One of the questions was about keys to community building in innovation districts. And I'm not exactly sure, but I'm assuming it's community building within the innovation community and then the broader metro community as well. Any thoughts or insights on community building?
One of the ways I would say, and it kind of goes back to overlaps with the former discussion was how we intend to use Innovation Hall space. And one of the ways that we're finding success in forging partnerships across the ecosystem and with neighboring communities as well is partnering on programming of the space, so that it's not, you know, we've got some really successful programming of our own that we will move into the building that has a following and people are liking it. We will also, though, have partnerships with other ecosystem members where they will program the space. And again, that's true with community organizations, so that not only the atmosphere and the activity in the space is of interest by all, but it's also kind of developed by all. And so that has been for us a way that we are going to do several things. One is successfully activate the space and bring, you know, a lot of activity from ecosystem members and community members, but also, you know, get a lot of really good content as well.
Tom, I'll also add one of the, I think, unique aspects of 16 Tech, and Katie might feel this way too, but it will be part of the case study in a couple years. When 16 Tech Community Corporation was created, community was all external because no one was working in our district.
Right.
Now that we've opened 3 buildings and we have people working in the district, you know, our view of community has evolved because it's bringing people. It's a two-way exchange of people and ideas, and so for us, in our initial stages, we had to all go outside in order to connect with community. And now we're trying to bring people in and break down some silos that admittedly existed because of not having a physical space that we could convene people in from the very beginning. And so for us, you know, we think about community in a very big tent way. It's both people who are working in the district, but it's also the residents in the neighborhoods around 16 Tech and the broader
right.
Indianapolis community.
And I think all of that speaks to district's role in ecosystem development in general, and how that having a place-based strategy, having well-resourced organizations with both physical assets and programmatic missions can help jumpstart kind of tier 2 cities. But getting a little bit to Mark's question in the chat, you know, we all operate on this really weird, like, we are top-down organizations by nature. You know, my board is essentially the 9 most influential people in Western Pennsylvania. That I then, and I'm not a founder. And so we then suffer from imposter syndrome a little bit and inauthenticity reading by actual startup community members. And you know, the interesting thing about startup communities is they're self-selected. These are folks who identify themselves and have set out on this path. And I think they smell BS really early. And so it's hard to institutionalize ecosystem development. And so this approach that Emily and Katie are, I think, both pointing me in the direction of inviting in established organizations, being the reverse gatekeeper and making sure those grassroots organizations have a home, have resources, have someone to buy the snacks is a really, really not just a smart plan, but it's essential for kind of these mid-sized cities to be able to catalyze those networks.
Yeah. Tom, I'll also address the question that Bob put in the chat too. Besides Brookings, what other innovation district reading materials do you recommend? And it gets exactly to what Sean was saying. I like benchmarking against organizations that are not innovation districts. So looking at what Atlanta Tech Village is doing, for example. I mean, that is a clear entrepreneurial-led startup community. And so I think it's great to have opportunities like this to connect with other innovation district leaders. The role that Brookings plays in providing research in terms of innovation districts is really fundamental. But I'd also look to some of these other groups like ATV, which have an incredible track record in terms of what they have done to contribute to the overall ecosystem in Atlanta. And I personally get really excited learning from them and in terms of what they're doing to support their local ecosystems.
That's a really good tip. Any other organizations you guys can recommend people look at that are interesting examples?
I think some universities have interesting. I kind of curate things from all over, so it's not like a wholesale adoption of exactly what another innovation district did, for example, but
sure.
But finding those things within a research park that's not really an innovation district, or within a university that maybe has determined it's an innovation district. But I think there are piece parts. It depends on what you're looking for too. Because I think, for example, we were looking at models for a minority small business and entrepreneurship center and a business accelerator, minority business accelerator. So we were looking to Enterprise Center in Philadelphia. And that's not an innovation district, but it is a successful model for the item that we were looking for, or the Cincinnati Chambers version of that. So that's kind of how I do it. I will find a subject that I'm fascinated by or wanting to learn more about, and my investigation on that usually leads me in many different places.
And maybe on the opposite end of that spectrum, we've been part of the Global Institute on Innovation Districts for the past 3 years. That is very much, believers in the space, talking to other believers in the space, as opposed to Atlanta Tech Village or Enterprise Center that are mission oriented and not concerned about the essential Brookings thesis of all of this. But I do think they're putting out some really compelling research, and it's very much not a US based conversation. And it's really opened my eyes, and I think my team's eyes, to kind of this global network and this global initiative that is developing.
Yeah, it's interesting to see their map, and then the sort of the talent and the tech stacks in each city, and it seems like a very interesting organization with a lot of great shared information. Any other questions? We're about to wrap up. There's a question. Well, you guys saw about emerging tech. I do think that when you see these inflection points in technology, everybody's starting with a blank slate, right? I mean, there is not a lot of institutional knowledge right now around NFTs, even around crypto, even though it's been around, more than a decade. And blockchain. And I do think as these technologies are implemented, it does provide both individuals, but also cities, an opportunity to look at building tech stacks that are the tech stacks of, Web 3.0 and these distributed kinds of technologies and ledger technologies we're talking about. Any thoughts on that as we wrap up? And you look to sort of building for this next wave of tech this scary wave of tech we're about to have to deal with?
I am interested in what districts can do to take advantage of kind of the Web3 metaverse framework. I am cautiously skeptical on how mainstream that's going to go, how fast. Yeah. But I'm now old enough to remember kind of being at downtown organizations when social media was in a very similar position. And those districts that got their handles first, that got a hold of that first, are still reaping the benefits of first mover advantage. So we've had some conversations with some of the more lightweight, more nimble Web3 groups in Pittsburgh. And again, this is like, they don't really care what's happening at Carnegie Mellon University. Right. They don't really care what's happening with a big foundation funded initiative. So I think we have to figure out how to take their lead rather than kind of trying to grab hold of them and drag them into the district with us. Yes,
for sure. All right. Well, this has been a great hour, and I mean, I've learned a lot. I hope you guys have learned some interesting things and have gotten to meet each other, and may continue the conversation after this. We'll check back with all of you in a year and see how your business plans have evolved. It'll be interesting, right? It's a moving target, but thank you all. Thank everybody for attending. And we will be back in a month with another event, and we'll see all you guys in about a year.
Sounds
all right.
great.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Tom.
Yep. Have a great afternoon, everyone.